Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back once again to Compass Points, the podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, events, politics, and anything else that catches our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, and I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing okay now. I had a professional crisis last week.
Oh no!
Yeah, as you know, I went to Gulf Shores, Alabama.
I do recall that
for several days to ostensibly to launch the Compass Gulf Coast Bureau.
Big initiative.
And I looked. There was absolutely no news down there that had anything to do with Knox County.
Really?
And I wound up wasting my time eating seafood and walking along the beach and that sort of thing.
I'm sorry to hear that trip was kind of a bust.
It was a bust. I want to apologize to you and to our readers for not being able to come through on that one.
With Knoxville news and Gulf Shores.
Yeah.
Well, all you can do is keep trying. There's other beach towns you might find some Knoxville news in.
Yeah, I intend to try over and over again until I get it right.
I think you can still write the trip off, though. We've talked about it on the podcast, so that feels to me like it's a pretty official...
Don't say anything out loud. I don't want the IRS to get a... Anyway, but better news. Today is Friday.
It is.
And... it is a special day for you, Jesse.
It is. It's a special day because it's Bruce Springsteen's birthday.
You share a birthday with Bruce Springsteen.
I do share a birthday with Bruce Springsteen. Yes, today is my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Is that good news when you get to our age? I mean, I guess it's good news, right? Well, what's the alternative?
Yeah, you're upright.
I'm still here. Still here, feeling good. And we are here to talk about Knoxville, politics, government, all sorts of things. We had sort of an interesting assortment of things happen over the past week that we've written about at Compass. We do also have an interview segment this week, a really good one. Definitely encourage people to stick around and listen. We had a talk with Holly McCall, who is the editor-in-chief of Tennessee Lookout, which hopefully people are familiar with. It's a very good news outlet that is not even subscription like Compass because they have a different funding model. So anybody can go to TennesseeOutlook.com and get caught up on state government coverage and so forth.
Tennessee Lookout. You said Outlook.
Sorry, Tennessee Lookout, not Tennessee Outlook.
That's a mistake I usually make.
Don't go to TennesseeOutlook.com. I don't know what's there. Go to TennesseeLookout.com,
yes.
Like Lookout Mountain. Yeah. And so we'll be talking to Holly about what she does and also kind of the state of Tennessee journalism and political journalism in general. We will be talking, speaking of state politics, we'll be talking a little bit about a controversy that blew up this past week about a transgender health clinic at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, which is not a local story exactly, but it has statewide implications, and we also had some local figures who got involved in the discussion. We will also be talking about abortion, again, a statewide issue with strong local impacts, and we had a couple of things to talk about there. The University of Tennessee came through with its plan to somewhat restructure, less drastically, I think, than some people were afraid of, or maybe we're hoping for. The College of Arts and Science is there, so we'll talk about that. And we're going to start out by talking about an issue that came up at County Commission this past week at their work session. Commissioners were talking about their annual contract with Young Williams Animal Center. And Scott, you know this, and you've written about Young Williams as well. It is it's an independent nonprofit, but it's one that is jointly funded by the city and the county. They each put in, this year they're budgeted to $1.075 million, nearly $1.1 million each, the city and county are putting in, which accounts for about a third of the center's overall funding, with most of the rest of their funding coming from adoption fees from people who come and adopt cats and dogs, and neutering fees and the other various services they provide. And so as county commissioners were talking about this, and of course, one of these sort of interesting notes to this is that the executive director of Young Williams is Janet Testerman, who is also a city council member and also a recent state legislature candidate. So she's kind of a political figure herself, but in her day job, she runs the animal shelter.
She's been busy lately.
Right. So. And so a couple of commissioners had questions for her about the fact that several times in recent months, I think the number was 20 out of the past 64 days, so nearly a third of the time in the last 2 months, Young Williams has been operating on what they call an emergency-only status, which means that they don't tell, but they ask both the city and county animal control divisions, which are part of law enforcement for both of them, to only bring them animals that are in crisis, serious injuries of various kinds, or that are presenting an immediate danger or threat to the community in one way or another, and not to just kind of bring in their more run-of-the-mill stray dogs and cats wandering around that somebody's called in. And the reason for this is that they have been very crowded. And so some commissioners were kind of asking, like, what's going on? Why? Like, we're paying you $1 million a year from the county, another $1 million from the city, and now you're having all these days where you're saying, don't bring us too many animals. And Testerman answered, and I wasn't aware of this until she talked about it, but I guess summertime is always the busiest time for animal shelters. And so when we talk about those past 60 days, it's mostly sort of like July and August into September. And the reasons for this, if you think about it a little bit, are not that surprising. For one thing, it's, spring into summer is the major cat mating season. Yes. And as we know, cats have lots of kittens. When they have babies, they have a bunch of them. And so suddenly in July and August, there's this influx of whether it's people bringing their own cat got pregnant, or a neighborhood cat or whatever, but suddenly all these kittens are showing up, and they are going to take the kittens because kittens need care, and kittens are also very adoptable, and so that's one pressure point. Also, apparently, vacations play a big role in this. I'm a pet owner myself. It would not occur to me to say, I love my dog or my cats in our case, but I'm going out of town for a couple of weeks and I don't have anybody to take care of it. This may be more an issue with dogs, because dogs, of course, really need that daily, they need somebody taking care of them. And people will actually give up their pets, relinquish ownership of their pets because they're going on vacation. That's something that happens.
That's not a problem with dogs or cats. It's a problem with owners.
It is a problem with owners. I agree, but it's one of these things that
what happens.
That Young Williams is sort of the last resort for
they've got to deal
things.
with it. Yeah.
And then the other thing that happens with vacations is people who are going to adopt or thinking about adopting pets tend to not do it as much in the summer, precisely because they have plans, they have travel plans. If you know that you're going to the beach or to Italy or whatever you're doing, that is not the time you're going to go and adopt a puppy or a kitten. Right. That you're going to wait until you get back. And so there's this tendency to have a backlog, and Testerman said that this past August was actually the busiest single month they've had since 2016. So they're just kind of overrun with these animals. But she assured commissioners that Young-Williams does continue to provide, the emergency service when there's an animal that really needs to be dealt with. And so it was an interesting discussion, kind of about the services they provide and then some of the limitations that they have sometimes.
Yeah, and if our listeners might be wondering, Young-Williams has taken in a lot of the beagles that were
the Great Beagle Rescue from Virginia.
From Virginia, but that's not contributing to this because they are not adopted, but they've got foster families already arranged, and so they just take them and pass them through.
Yeah, I think there were 20 beagles that came in out of 4,000 that were rescued from this facility in Virginia that was breeding them to be sold to laboratories for experimentation, and the whole thing got shut down. It's the largest animal rescue in American history, maybe world history, I don't know. And so more than 100 shelters across the country volunteered to take some of them. Young-Williams did process 20 of them, but like you say, those beagles came here and immediately went to either new owners or to foster situations, and they are not taking up. It's all local animals.
These are all locals.
So anyway, that was just an interesting conversation about a service that I think a lot of people are aware of, but probably don't think about all of the different factors that go in and that affect the animal shelter. Shifting gears, let's talk about the University of Tennessee College of Arts and Sciences.
Well, we will talk about that because the university administration finally came through with their proposal for restructuring. It was originally the College of Arts and Sciences the original thought was to split it up. It's the largest college, more than 700 faculty members, thousands of students. They were going to split it up into smaller colleges. Faculty revolt is probably too strong a word, but the faculty certainly weren't pleased. The vast majority of them wanted them to not do anything, but what they decided to do was more or less keep it intact. There's an exception. We'll talk about that in a second. But what they're going to do is they're going to add a layer of oversight, I guess, management, if you want to call it that. And divide. They're not really dividing the school, but there are going to be 3 divisions. There's going to be a division of arts and humanities, a division of social sciences, and a division of natural sciences and mathematics. Each of those divisions is going to have its own dean, the way a college would, but then the college itself is going to have an executive dean that those deans are going to report to. So they're basically kind of dividing it up, but there's still one College of Arts and Sciences.
Maintaining most of the structure, but creating somewhat separate divisions within that.
Kind of silos within that. Although they probably would object to using the term silo, because one of the things that had been a concern is that when you're within a college, there's a lot of students will take classes in any of those divisions, and they go back and forth easily. When you divide them up into colleges, that happens less often. So that's the proposal that they announced. It's going to go before the Board of Trustees in the winter to get their approval for it. One of the things that is very important to remember is this is a 2-year pilot program. After 2 years, they may go ahead and split it up,
right.
or they may not.
There's no guarantee about what might happen.
There's no guarantee what's going to happen in 2 years, but it could be one of those things where once the faculty get used to this, then they'll see that it'll be great or not.
Well, and so I think that the biggest concern from the faculty, right, was that by breaking it up, I mean, first of all, like you say, it would make it harder possibly or less likely for students to kind of take classes across the range of disciplines in arts and sciences. But specifically for people on the sort of social sciences, humanities, and arts side of that school, there was a concern that by splitting off the natural sciences and mathematics, which I think a lot of people see as, for one thing, those are often disciplines where it's easier to raise research funding and that kind of thing, that it would end up marginalizing sort of the arts and humanities rather than having them be part of the biggest college on campus. They would kind of become off on their own little island.
They'd be smaller and less important.
Right.
And a lot of the faculty look at arts and sciences as kind of being the core of a university.
It's the classic liberal arts model.
Right. And so splitting that up, it could have some ramifications. One of the faculty members had talked about how when the Haslam School of Business or College of Business removed a foreign language requirement for its students, foreign language classes all of a sudden were empty, and they had to cut some of the classes. And then, so if you split those up, and a separate college of natural sciences and mathematics decided that their students really didn't need foreign languages either, they could remove that as a requirement. Yet again, have an impact on those programs. So there is a practical thing. There's a funding thing. They changed the funding model. There was, I think, some concern that the funding would skew more toward, as you mentioned earlier, the natural sciences. But really, most of the concern about funding from faculty that I heard came about because dividing it up into 2 or 3 separate colleges, instead of just having like an extra dean that they're going to do now, would have a complete new bureaucracy for each of those.
It needs separate
lots
administrations.
of administrators, not just a dean. So the faculty was, I think they were instrumental probably in getting the administration to say, okay, we'll keep it all intact, except for one thing.
Right. There is an exception.
There is an exception. It is the College of Music.
The soon-to-be
College of Music. The music department at UT will branch off from the College of Arts and Sciences and have its own college. Everybody seems okay with that.
It's a relatively small program compared to some of the other programs in that school.
It is. It's relatively small. It is. You could argue it's as specialized as any of them, and the demands on students and the requirements of faculty are different.
Right. Because so much of it is built around performance.
It's all about performance. Students who are in music, as any of them will tell you, they have hours and hours and hours of uncredited time that they put into practice, and for faculty members, they don't do it's a different type of research that they do, and they a lot of demands on them that are different. So it's going to have its own. It would have its own college. Which will be interesting. They've got a brand new building, or not brand new, but it's a new building over there, the Natalie Haslam Music Center. And
and that was one thing I was going to say, and of course, none of this was said explicitly, so we can only sort of intuit some things, but one thing that school would seem to, because they already have the Haslams and Natalie Haslam in particular as a major benefactor. And so one concern you might have about breaking off a College of Music is kind of, can it sustain itself? But it already has a pretty strong philanthropic support base.
It sure does. And so there are, as they like to say, naming opportunities there, because we do have a Tickle College of Engineering.
Right.
We have the Haslam School of Business, your College of Business. So there are naming opportunities there that UT will probably be very interested in taking advantage of.
Sure.
One of the other things that we mentioned earlier briefly was kind of the interdisciplinary thing. UT is creating a new college, is what they're calling it, for interdisciplinary programs. That's where they will live. It's a little vague about how that's going to work out. it's not going to have faculty members. It's not going to have it's basically an administrative home for majors and programs that don't quite fit into any of the other colleges. In my head, I call it the land of misfit majors.
Mm-hmm.
And there will be opportunities to have these interdisciplinary programs that take elements from various colleges and put them in one program, and all all the faculty members and the classes are in those disparate colleges, but the degree will be granted through the new college.
Right. So for example, and I'm not saying this is one that they will have or won't have, I have no idea, but you could imagine like a history of science program that could draw equally on the history department and biology or something like that.
Yeah. That's kind of the type of program that could find a home here, and I don't know. There are plenty of others where you could combine, architecture and economics and all kinds of things that I'm sure they are looking into creating. There's that. So, and then yet again, so this is actually 3 new colleges will be part of UT. Then there's going to be the Baker College or Baker School. They haven't decided yet. Of public policy at the Baker Center. For public policy now. It is going to take the research that is they already have a research arm, and it's mostly on energy and environment and global relations, and they're going to take that, keep that, and expand offerings. And create an undergraduate and graduate program there with that. And the Institute for American Civics that we've talked about plenty of times here.
Created by Governor Lee.
Governor Lee and the legislature created it and are funding it. And it's going to be a subunit of the Baker College or Baker School, whatever they end up deciding to call it. And one of the things that's interesting, I was talking with Mary Ann Wanamaker, who's the executive director of the Baker Center, is that even before the Civics Institute, was announced, and that was in the state address in winter, they had talked about creating a college there. I think that there'd been some discussions, especially with the graduate programs and research that they do, and they. And I think that this, then the Lee came up with the Civics Institute, and I think that kind of helped, was a catalyst maybe to go ahead and take that leap. So that's what they're going to be doing.
All right. Well, and I guess we'll just see how all of that plays out. But overall, not the level of sort of really dramatic breakup and shakeup that some people in the college had been concerned about, and maybe some people in the administration wanted to see, but that's
right.
Not what happened.
One of the things is it's a really big deal that they're creating three new colleges.
Right.
But they are also the controversial part of it was the College of Arts and Sciences, and it does stay intact for the most part.
There will still be one.
There will still be one, and at least for the next 2 years.
All right. Okay, well, moving from there to, I think what we have to call a pretty hot topic. We had a little more to say this past week about the state's abortion ban, which of course took effect on August 25th, so we're coming up on basically a month of this being in effect. And let's be very clear about this, because there is a lot of talk about it out there, like what exactly does Tennessee's law say? Abortion's illegal in Tennessee. Like all abortions are illegal in Tennessee, period. There's no exception in the law for rape. There's no exception for incest. There is no exception for the life or health of the mother. As we've talked about a little bit before, there is an affirmative defense for a doctor if they perform what they consider a life-saving procedure that ends up in terminating a pregnancy, but to save the life of the pregnant person. And then they get charged with a felony. they will have an affirmative defense to say, I was saving the life of the mother, and if they make that case persuasively, they can avoid, prosecution or conviction, perhaps. But that is not an actual exception. That's just like that's a legal path that's available to somebody once they've been charged with a felony.
Yeah, they would still be charged with a felony. They would still have to hire a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah.
They would still have to go through the whole legal process. And if it goes all the way to trial, then they have to persuade a jury that the mother's life was truly in danger, and then they might be acquitted. I mean, that's it's a real risky thing for these practitioners, and that has been a big concern among practitioners. And you wrote a story that focused on that part of it.
Yeah, Dr. Nikki Zeit, who is an OBGYN here in Knoxville and has been one of the leading voices in the state among doctors. And of course, she's opposed to the ban overall. In her view, abortion ought to be viewed as sort of a fundamental part of reproductive health care. But she said specifically the way this law is written, there are a lot of complications that can occur and do occur on a regular basis in pregnancy. And I think that our modern medical system is good enough that people sometimes lose sight of how actually complicated and dangerous in a lot of cases pregnancies are. Of course, it used to be an incredibly dangerous thing. I mean, childbirth used to be the single most dangerous thing a woman could do. And we still have lots of circumstances where a pregnancy that might be a wanted pregnancy, maybe a pregnancy somebody's been trying for, can still at a certain point develop complications. And there are a lot of different complications that have serious potential health consequences for the woman. And doctors have been accustomed for a long time to treat, and those may not be the things that people think of as quote unquote abortion, because we think of abortion as, what people like to call elective abortion, which is somebody who's pregnant who decides, I don't want to be pregnant, I don't want to have this baby for a whole range of reasons, and they go and make an appointment and do it. It doesn't tend to be thought about in like these terms of, it's like a medically necessary procedure to terminate a pregnancy. But in fact, that's the case in a lot of these situations. And it is unclear to a lot of doctors how this law sees those kinds of cases. On the one hand, you have anti-abortion groups like Tennessee Right to Life come out and say, no, this law doesn't ban, like ectopic pregnancies. That's one thing that gets talked about, where the egg implants, in the fallopian tube, like outside the uterus, which is very dangerous. And, Tennessee Right to Life has just kind of said, oh no, this doesn't apply to that. Well, the law doesn't say that. The law says nothing about ectopic pregnancies. It says from the moment of fertilization on. And so we don't, there are some things here that we don't actually know what this law means, because there has, as far as any of us know, there haven't been yet any prosecutions under it or even investigations that anybody's reported. And so doctors are having to, and this is something that Dr. Zeit talked about, doctors often in the heat of the with not a whole lot of time to make a decision, maybe a matter of hours, maybe a matter of days, are having to figure out, is this situation one that this law is going to consider an illegal abortion or not? And they're getting very little help on this from, hospitals, which is where a lot of these decisions are going to be made, are coming up with guidance and guidelines in-house, but they're mostly not talking about them publicly because there's all sorts of legal potential issues there. We requested, we asked a lot of our local major healthcare centers that have birthing centers and didn't hear back from any of them about what guidelines they're providing to staff. I'm sure their lawyers probably aren't enthusiastic to talk about those things publicly. They're also not getting any guidance from the criminal justice system. There's a couple of Democratic prosecutors in Nashville and Shelby County, Memphis, that have come out and said they're going to deprioritize any kind of abortion investigation or prosecution. But most district attorneys, including our own in Knox County, Sharm Allen, have said, I will apply the law as written. And that's an understandable thing. The DAs did not write the law. And so you can say, well, it's not really up to them, except at a basic level it is, because they are eventually going to be the ones making charging decisions, should anything actually become prosecutable. And we don't even know if our district attorney's office is doing anything to research these issues. Are they having any kind of staff training? Are they trying to build up any expertise? The DA's office has expertise in a lot of different areas where they will have assistant district attorneys who only handle certain kinds of cases. We don't know because, again, they're not talking about it. Nobody, it's kind of like we passed this thing and now nobody really wants to say what it means. Nobody really wants to define what will be, or there's some things that are clearly illegal under this, which is why every abortion clinic in the state is no longer providing abortions.
Right.
But there's all these medical situations that arise in the course of pregnancies that do lead to pregnancies being terminated on a regular basis, and which of those might still be okay or not, or under what circumstances. And there is discussion even among some Republican legislators that they want to come back and try to pull that back a little bit, and granting some exceptions for the life and safety of the mother, for rape and incest. And one of the factors that they'll probably be talking about when it comes time for that legislative session, or at least they'll have in mind, is public opinion on all of this. And so we also had a story this past week that got at opinion about this a little bit, and you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, it's our monthly power poll, which is a survey. It's not a scientific poll like a regular opinion poll that you're most familiar with. It's just a survey of business and political and educational and nonprofit leaders,
community leaders across Knox
County.
County.
Decision makers and influencers in Knox County.
And we should say we run this in partnership with an organization called PowerPoll. You go to powerpoll.com. They run these in I forget how many cities now. I think more than 30 cities they have them. They actually maintain those lists of the community leaders, although we have some input into that. But this is not, I always say with the PowerPoll, it's something that we're a partner in, but it's not something we invented, I guess.
We didn't invent this. But it does show, of those who respond, kind of what these people who either make decisions or have influence with those who do make decisions.
Elite opinion.
Yes, it is. It is the elite opinion. And then anyway, so we asked them about abortion, various questions about it, and it's interesting. 2/3 said that the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe versus Wade and Casey, and removed what had been considered a constitutional right to abortion for almost 50 years, they disagreed with that decision completely. And then a similar number, about 2/3, said that they would be in favor of Tennessee lifting the ban in its entirety.
Right.
And basically the state would go back to what things were before the ban went into place, which is just a couple of months ago. So that would be the preference, about 65% of them. If the ban stayed in place, and this was a striking thing, a whopping 97% said that they wanted exceptions for rape, incest, and to save the life and preserve the health of the mother.
Right. Which is so that means of those, because there were about 30% who agreed with the Supreme Court decision and did not want to overturn. But then out of that 30%, only 3% actually wanted to not include those exceptions. And so I think if you were a Republican legislator, especially a Republican legislator who maybe has some personal misgivings about the extent of the ban and the effects it's having, those kinds of numbers. And there was an actual scientific survey that came out not too long ago of state opinion that I think found 80% support, at least for having those exceptions.
Right. Yeah, it was about 80%. It was a Vanderbilt University poll. It was it's a little dated. It was conducted after the draft opinion of the Dobbs decision that Alito wrote, Justice Alito wrote, was leaked to the media and got all kinds of press coverage. It was after that, but before the actual decision was issued. Of course, there was very little difference. There was no effective difference between the draft and what the court actually issued as its opinion. So that about 80% wanted some. So it's there's a lot of public opinion, I think that
and people. Well, I think the other thing we should say is people seem to feel strongly about this. Our own response rate to this power poll was a bit higher than normal. We got over 200 responses out of 600 plus that went out. That's more than we usually get. So I think that shows a level of engagement. And also, we asked people whether this was going to be important in their voting this fall.
Right, and this is where the candidates for the state legislature will probably pay a little bit of attention. We did ask them, okay, how important is abortion as an issue, or the stances that these candidates take? How important is that when you go to the voting booth or you go to the polling place? How big of a factor will that be in your decision? And a majority of about 54% said very important. Mm-hmm. So that, I don't know if they'll be single issue voters, but they're going to really pay a lot of attention. And together with the somewhat importance, there 83% of the respondents said that it's going to play a role in who they vote for in November.
And of course, that may include people who support the ban too.
Absolutely,
but it definitely shows that this
is
it's an issue that a lot of people have strong feelings about. And I think that for so long, for decades, really, kind of anti-abortion rhetoric had free rein to kind of be as extreme as it wanted to be, which is what culminated in states like states with strong Republican conservative legislative majorities, led a good number of these states to pass these kind of prospective laws, which is what our trigger ban was. It was passed in 2019, well before the Supreme Court decision had come down. And I think at the time, because of course this was before there had been a couple of the new seats turned over on the Supreme Court, even a lot of Republicans who voted for the bill did not necessarily think it was ever or any time soon going to take effect. And so it was kind of a politically cost-free thing to just make this very strong, you could say extreme statement that I just don't want any abortions ever for any cause, for any reason, period. Because it was a kind of a hypothetical, it was a rhetorical bill, but it was a rhetorical bill that now has real-world legal effects. It is now the law of the land in Tennessee, and I think what we're seeing is at least some people backing away from that a little bit and saying, well, we
didn't realize this was going to happen, and
right?
So, and which could result in some adjustments to that
I think
law.
The other thing we're going to see in the legislature, though, is there will be people who will bring laws to enhance the restrictions, to potentially try to go after anybody or any providers out of state, for example, who provide an abortion to somebody from Tennessee, maybe like the kind of Private Cause of Action Act that Texas passed, where if somebody in Texas goes to Pennsylvania to have an abortion, someone in Texas can sue the person in Pennsylvania for having provided the abortion. We may see those kinds of proposals also come through, and so clearly it's going to be a hot issue. And of course, what happens in the November elections may have some impact on that too.
Right.
Speaking of the midterm elections that are coming up, we had yet another hot button issue kind of blow up at the state level this past week, and this had to do with the Vanderbilt University Medical Clinics or Medical Center's transgender health clinic. And I don't want to go too far into this because it is not an entirely local issue, obviously, but it does have local impacts because this was I'm not putting it in past tense, although I'll get to that in a second.
There's some who want to.
Right. But it's the major transgender health clinic in the state for people who are, sort of seeking transition of whether it's chemical or surgical, but also, psychological services, like a whole range of care around transgender issues. And there is an anti-transgender advocate activist named Matt Walsh, who is a columnist for the Daily Wire, which is a conservative news outlet website. And Walsh is one of this sort of coterie of, I would say, kind of young right-wing pundits who have gravitated to Nashville in recent years. I think there's an idea in the kind of conservative intellectual circles that Nashville is a friendly place for them because Tennessee is a very red state, obviously. I think maybe some of them get to Nashville and are a little disappointed that Nashville itself as a city is actually pretty blue and progressive. But so Matt Walsh has moved there. Ben Shapiro, who runs the Daily Wire, has moved there. I think Candace Owens has a place in Nashville. So we have this whole new sort of group of young conservative firebrands making that, who don't, I should say, have any connection to Tennessee or background in Tennessee politics or culture or anything. But so Matt Walsh is a guy who has transgender issues are kind of his thing. He made a movie called What is a Woman, which is, a very strong anti-transgender, kind of presenting the idea that people are somehow being, tricked or deceived into making decisions that then, destroy their lives and so forth by going through transgender transitions. And he picked up on the existence of this transgender health clinic at Vanderbilt and tweeted about it. And that's really all he did. He also put up a podcast episode about it. But this all really started with sort of a series of tweets. And it kind of shows the influence of conservative. Some people talk about the media as sort of being a big political player. And often by that they mean, the New York Times or CNN or something. And I think people don't always appreciate the degree to which, especially in a red state like Tennessee, conservative media is a huge influence on our politics. And so we have this conservative pundit and anti-transgender activist put out some tweets about this clinic at Vanderbilt and essentially went after particularly the care they provide to minors, people under the age of 18. And they do, and all of this is, and Vanderbilt came out with a statement just saying, we set up this clinic because transgender people have specific medical, healthcare, psychological needs, and it's often an underserved and easily targeted, very vulnerable population in a lot of ways, as we're seeing. And we wanted, and also that any care provided to minors there is with parental consent, and they always encourage and are happy to have parental involvement. They never turn away any parent of anybody under 18 from being involved there. But nevertheless, just the fact that they're there and doing this, and this wasn't news, I should say. This clinic has
it's been there for a while.
been there. And it's part of, by far, the best, what I think everybody would say is the top hospital in the state. I mean, Vanderbilt is one of the top hospitals in the country. People come here from all over for, various kinds of healthcare services at Vanderbilt. But this series of tweets came out on, I think, Tuesday. By Tuesday evening, then the Daily Wire had an exclusive, because they had gotten a statement from Governor Bill Lee's office about this, basically saying that he wanted the state to investigate this and see what was going on. By the next day, a bunch of Republicans across the state, including here in Knox County, Knox County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and our state representative Jason Zachary, who literally called this clinic evil. This is, remember, a legal functioning medical clinic at the best hospital in the state that, as far as anybody knows, and Matt Walsh didn't present any evidence that they're doing anything, illegal or against standard medical guidance, or even that any patients or families had raised concerns. There may be some out there. He didn't cite anything that there was any issue here. It was just its mere existence. And within a day, we have our own state rep here, Jason Zachary, literally calling it evil, which kind of shows you how quickly the rhetoric can get ramped up here. And the reason I preface this by talking about the midterms is I think it's very clear that this particular issue of sort of transgender people overall and their presence in society and whether or not they should be treated with dignity and respect and sort of basic civil rights, but particularly then zeroing in on underage people, because it's always the most compelling case politically to talk about children, that children are somehow being victimized by this and so forth, which is counter to what the American Psychological Association says. Their concern is much more that children with sort of gender dysphoria who don't receive care, don't have access to any kind of treatment, are much more likely to suffer self-harm, suicide. I mean, the data is pretty compelling on that. Nevertheless, there's this focus on the right on this, and I think a lot of it is just that it's kind of, we often see these kind of red meat culture war issues come to the fore ahead of a midterm election, and that feels like what's happening here.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it plays a huge role in it. And one thing that is supremely misunderstood when talking about this issue is you don't walk into a hospital and say, "Hey, I want gender reassignment surgery,"
right?
And they zip you in, they admit you, and off you go. And it's that way for adults.
Yeah.
And it's even more so for kids. There is intensive psychological therapy that goes on. There is hormonal. You have to hormones for a year. There's all kinds of stuff that I don't know about. I don't know all of the steps.
But including often they want people to actually sort of dress and live as the gender that they feel for a while before taking any of those physical steps.
Right, and so it's not like you can just walk in and have this done just because you want it done. It's if there are red flags that show up in the during the mental health therapy that they go through, then they'll generally put the brakes on that.
Yeah.
So we're supposed to. So it's not a snap decision on the parts of the doctors or the patients, and regardless of age.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I just want to say anecdotally that I have a couple of friends who have had children, underage children, who have transitioned to different degrees in different ways, and who have had access to these kinds of clinics and this kind of care. And they are all, the children themselves, the parents, and sure, you never know what's going to happen in the course of somebody's life, but the people who I know very much feel that it was valuable to them and valuable to their children to have access to that. And what is now being talked about, Jason Zachary and others are talking about coming back with a bill that's actually going to make this kind of treatment illegal in Tennessee, at least for anybody underage. I mean, who knows if then eventually that extends beyond that. But in the meantime, Vanderbilt, at least as of last time I checked Friday morning, had completely taken down the website for that clinic. So anybody in Tennessee right now who's trying to get information about that clinic, all of their web pages are gone. They haven't made any statement about that. I don't know if it's that their lawyers came in and said, all right, pull everything down until we have a chance to review it and see what all we're saying or whatever. But it's not, we kind of went again from having a couple of tweets on a Tuesday to the website of the clinic, disappearing by Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, it shows how these things can happen in our current political situation and cycles.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of political situations and cycles, this brings us to our interview this week with Holly McCall, who is the editor-in-chief of Tennessee Lookout at TennesseeLookout.com. And we talked about the impacts on our understanding of state and local government and politics brought about by changes in our media landscape and kind of the role that we are all playing in that and how we see that playing out. So let's go ahead and hear the interview. Okay, joining us for our interview segment this week, we have a special guest. Holly McCall is the editor-in-chief of Tennessee Lookout at TennesseeLookout.com. And it is a free news site that covers government, politics, education across the state of Tennessee. They do good work, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to talk to Holly a little bit about what she does, and then kind of some of what we all see in journalism in Tennessee. So Holly, thanks a lot for joining us.
Hey, Jesse, Scott, thanks for having me on here. I think you guys know that I am a big fan of Compass, and I subscribe to it myself, as well as making my brother who lives in Knoxville subscribe to it.
Well, we very much appreciate that, and tell your brother we said thanks. And we are big fans of the Lookout as well. We often link to your stories. I think it's a great resource for people. So I thought to start off, can you tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself, because you have an interesting background in both media and politics, and then talk kind of about the Tennessee Lookout, how it came to be, and what your mission is with it.
Okay. So also, you guys feel free to interrupt at any time if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, or if you want to dig a little deeper. So I do have a bit of a checkered past, or a divided past. I've spent most of my 35-year career going back and forth between politics and journalism, which is rare. It used to be if you left journalism and worked in politics, there was no coming back from the dark side. And I have always been interested in both. I, edited my school newspaper when I was a kid, and I wrote my first column in the Franklin hometown newspaper when I was in high school. It was called As Teens Tell It. But I also really liked politics, and I paged at the state legislature when I was 15. And I thought Victor Ashe was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so then I went to UT, and I, indulged my political interest. And I promise I'm not going to go step by step through my career, but I have managed to go back and forth. I worked in newsrooms in Columbus, Ohio, where I got to cover city government. And then I worked in Joplin, Missouri, which had I learned a lot about methamphetamines there. Seriously, this was in the early 2000s, and I had no clue how bad meth was in rural areas. And I moved back to Nashville, worked for the Nashville Business Journal. And so I actually had a chaotic quest to run for office in 2016, because the person who was representing me at the time was, to put it short, was not a good dude. And I lost. And honestly, I thought I would never be back in journalism, which is just doing some freelance writing. And I had this opportunity to come help set up the state outlet for State's Newsroom. And I'm going to segue into a little bit about State's Newsroom, if that's cool.
Please do.
Tennessee Lookout. So State's Newsroom is a nonprofit parent of the Tennessee Lookout, and now there are 29 other outlets across the state. We're getting ready to add 2 more. Kentucky's coming online soon, and South Dakota. And typically they set up in states where there's not really strong coverage of the state legislature. And unfortunately, that's almost every state now. We probably won't be in every state, but the Lookout launched in May of 2020. It was right after the COVID pandemic shutdowns began. Everything was up in the air. I wasn't sure how it was going to work, but as it turns out, there was really no better time to launch a news outlet focusing on state policy and politics. Mm-hmm. And my role, I say, is really that I was smart enough to make some very good friends. And then I was able to sweet talk them into coming on this new venture with me. So we have 3 full-time reporters. Anita Wadwani, who was with the Tennessean for years. She's won national awards. We have Sam Stockard, who also is a former Gannett person who'd been with the Daily News Journal in Murfreesboro. And we have Dulce Torres Guzman, who had done freelance writing for The Scene. This is her first full-time job. And then we also do freelance work with Jamie Satterfield, who worked with the
former colleague of both mine and Scott's.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
I'll bring her up because, I'm so tickled that she's working with you guys. She's a real bulldog when it comes to especially court reporting. So
she is a bulldog, and her stories are always really well read. And I also probably get as many negative comments on hers as anyone else's, which y'all know in journalism, that's not a bad thing, because if you're not, shall we say, irking somebody, you're probably not digging deep enough. So yeah, we've got a good team, and I'm along for the ride with them. I turn them loose. My only management philosophy is hire good people, stay out of their way, and don't mess with their money.
Well, and so you're editorially independent, I gather. What kind of State's newsrooms is it fair to say that it has a somewhat progressive orientation in its overall mission? Like, how would you characterize that?
So we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan State's newsroom is, and so is the Tennessee Lookout. Now, I would say our commentary tends to be left of center.
Mm-hmm.
Our news stories are straight down the middle. And again, sometimes people will say, well, you only write about Republicans. And my response to them, as is the case in many of our newsrooms, is there's a Republican majority.
Right.
And in Tennessee, there's a Republican supermajority. And there just aren't that many Democrats in elected office, particularly at the state legislature, state level. So if we're going to cover state government, we're going to be writing about Republicans most of the time.
Right. The Democrats are kind of in a position where they can kind of say anything they want to, and they do. They come out with strong statements on various things, but we all know, and they mostly know in making the statements, it doesn't really have any bearing in the near term on government in Tennessee because we have such a strong Republican majority. Well, so, since you've been there in Nashville, kind of both in journalism and in politics and dealing with the whole realm around the legislature, we're talking about journalism here. What have you seen over your time of engagement in terms of the level, first of all, just how many reporters there are there in Nashville, in the State House, covering what's going on? And, just what are the trends that you've seen?
And you guys, of course, understand this, but this is for your listeners. When I was first out of college, kicking around at Capitol Hill, there was probably a state Capitol Hill press bureau of 40 people, and now it's down to maybe 10.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is because big newspapers, the Tennessean, got bought up by Gannett, and then Gatehouse folded Gannett in, and those big papers that are now owned by corporations. I don't want to assign any terms to what they're doing, but the fact of the matter is there just is not the level of state political coverage or local. And you guys know everybody wants to talk about Donald Trump, and there are a lot of national news outlets, and we focus solely on state politics. If Donald Trump comes up in one of our stories, it's because he's had some interaction with a U.S. senator like Marsha Blackburn. But yeah, there's a huge gap, and local and state coverage is where I think the average citizen can have the biggest impact. And it's also, those are the levels that are having the biggest impact on our daily lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you mentioned the shrinking Capitol Hill press corps, when I started at the News Sentinel in the late 90s, we had two reporters on Capitol Hill. We had Tom Humphrey and Rebecca Farrar, and the late Rebecca Farrar. And now they don't have anybody. The News Sentinel doesn't have, they rely on the centralized Gannett people in Nashville with the Tennessean, but they,
the Tennessean, I believe, has the Tennessean itself has fewer people covering the legislature.
Oh, yeah.
They do. They've got two now, and they're both fairly young in their careers. And I think they're both talented and have potential. But, again, who knows if will they want to stay in this environment? Will they want to stay in corporate journalism? And one thing I think I'm going to make a little bit of a segue, because this is something, again, you guys understand, is there's a real growth of nonprofit media.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be something that readers are responding to very positively. Like, we don't have ads. I don't think you guys have any advertisements.
We've started running some very small ads in our daily email. And so far our readers have been accepting of that.
Well, I can look at your site and not get distracted by dozens of pop-up ads. And so it also, like, if you're a nonprofit, I think it gives us the freedom to specialize, to cover what we want. You guys are very Knox County oriented, which is great. We try to hit the whole state. And what we really try to hit is like these legislative issues, what's going on at the legislature. Sam Stocker does a great job of that. Anita Wadwani's got sources in state departments, and she covers the policy issues. But, the daily paper of record, the daily papers of record, they're very broad, and not everybody wants to see coverage about the Tennessee Titans or UT football or which country music singer has used a naughty word lately.
Yeah, and that is definitely something we talk about a lot, that we want, to the degree that we talk about any national politics or political figures, that it has to be connected to something specific happening here or somebody here. Or, for example, we have Ron DeSantis in town today for a fundraiser. So we noted that just because he's here, but we're not going to write a lot about it.
You're not going to send a photographer?
Scott, well, we don't have a photographer. That's one of our many weaknesses, for these being.
Hey, well, if y'all find one, we can split cost.
Right. I think his lunch is probably over about now. Maybe we could catch his motorcade on his way to the airport. But Scott was saying last week that he was proud that we were one of the only places around that. I don't think we mentioned the Queen once. I did check to see if there was any connection I could assert between Knoxville and Queen Elizabeth, but I came up empty, and so we let that one alone.
I found one connection, and we had somebody who wrote a column for us. But again, hey, no disrespect to the Queen, but she has no impact in Tennessee. And the amount of news coverage that was covered to her, I found irritating. And to be honest, I used to sit around and just rage and vent about, there is no sufficient coverage of what is going on in the state legislature and what is going on at the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. And, as Anita found out, there were kids sleeping on the floor of office buildings, and there's just not the resources to cover it, or maybe the wherewithal. And so for me, this is a dream job. I get to work with people I want. I get to write about the things that I want to read about. And frankly, it's become clear that other people want to read the kind of news that you and I are producing.
Yeah, one of the things that as we were going into this is that, the media landscape is fragmented. And if you wanted to read about the Queen or the succession or whatever, hey, there are plenty of media outlets who have, know a lot more about the monarchy than us.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know things about the monarchy, really, other than what anybody else might know. But that's not our area of expertise. Our area of expertise is Knox County and the city of Knoxville, and yours is state government. And, so people come to us for that.
Yeah.
And that alone. They go somewhere else for football,
And I've had people say to me, well, why don't you cover more about education? And, y'all know it's impossible to cover everything. So we'll hit an education story every once in a while. But if education is what you are most interested in, people should go check out Chalkbeat, which is another, I think it's a nonprofit that covers just education. And Marta Aldrich with them does a great job. And I actually kind of love this environment.
Yeah. And that's, we try to kind of see ourselves as part of our readers. We can't tell them everything that they need or want to know, right? So we're part of that network, or sort of a la carte approach, to media consumption, where we're their local news. Tennessee Lookout, can help provide that stateside. We link to Chalkbeat a lot for their coverage. There's some blogs here in town that cover some very specific things. There's one guy who really just writes about downtown Knoxville, and we link to him all the time because he's writing 5 stories a week about what's going on in Knoxville. We'll hit some of that, but we can't do it at that level. And so, I think it is, and maybe this is, you were talking about the traditional newspaper model being so broad, and maybe it's just that even they don't have the resources to actually do that anymore. And so maybe we're just in an environment where also consumers aren't necessarily looking for that one-stop shopping.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's what's given rise to all of these different outlets like yours, mine. I think MLK at 50, Wendy Thomas in Memphis does a great job focusing on social justice issues, particularly in Memphis. I'm enjoying it. And one of the things I like is you guys came up old school when we were all super competitive. When I was at the Nashville Business Journal covering development, if I could beat Richard Lawson at the Tennessean on something, it made my day. And now as there are fewer reporters, and we've actually seen our credibility be falsely attacked by national media figures, I think that we've become more cooperative. And there's still competition, but I really like the relationships that we've formed, that we have with Wendy, with the AP reporters. And so I think I like the environment better now than I used to, although I do miss my old school typewriter.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen that here locally. I think it's partly a function of there are just fewer of us total. And so, when like the 6 reporters in town who cover local government in any way all come together someplace, it's almost more of and of course, we're always glad when we break a story. You never lose that kind of excitement of like, hey, I'm going to be the first one to tell this. But like we've collaborated on some stories with the News Sentinel where neither of us would have had the resources to do the in-depth reporting that we did otherwise. We do appearances with local TV and radio and so forth. I think you're right that it is more kind of a sense of, because there's so few of us, like, all right, how do we tell people what they need to know and kind of focus on the things that we can provide to that, as opposed to everybody trying to do everything.
Right. And when we started, my goal was we're going to cover the stuff that everybody else is not covering, which for us means we cover a fair number of issues about immigrants and immigration, because I don't know about Knoxville. Nashville's got a pretty broad community of people who come here from other places. It's the largest number of Kurds outside of Kurdistan in Nashville, and it's just woefully undercovered. And, it's not a full-time beat, but it's certainly something we pay attention to.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've definitely had in mind, and it's a challenge for us. One of the things for us being so small, it is just the two of us, and we're very aware of the fact that we're 2 50-year-old white guys. And so from the beginning, we have tried to make sure that we ourselves are reaching out to, a range of voices in the community and trying to provide those and making sure that people are hearing from sort of all corners.
You guys do a good job on that. And I think half that battle is just being cognizant of the fact that there are other voices and doing it. This is going to sound snarky, in that sort of organic way, and not being like, oh, we are going to have a special story section on people who are not white. So I think you guys handle it pretty smoothly.
No, thanks. We hope to eventually have more people working with us, and maybe even somebody who's not a 50-year-old white guy. That might be a nice thing.
Well,
I'm sorry. I think our priority will be somebody who's not a 50-year-old white guy.
There's nothing wrong with
a good 50-year-old white guy to get a job.
Yeah.
Scott, you got anything else you want to hit on before we wrap it up?
Well, I just wanted to ask you, Holly, what do you think the future is going to be? A short-term future, because nobody can predict long-term futures. 10 years ago, this is not what I saw myself doing. I saw myself getting closer to retirement from an old school newspaper. So, but what do you see short term moving forward, especially with it doesn't necessarily have to be the state of the media. It can be what's going to be coming up in state government.
So there are a couple of things. First of all, I think just with the broader newspaper picture, we are seeing more of the big outlets that are converting to digital. The Chattanooga Times Free Press, which I still think is the best big daily in the state, is now digital except for Sundays.
The only one not owned by Gannett.
Yeah. But I'm going to tell you, if I were putting money on it, I would bet Gannett goes all digital except for maybe a Sunday paper within a year. And then in state government, I think we're going to see more of these culture wars. I don't know if you guys have noticed what's going on in Nashville at Vanderbilt University Medical Center just in the last couple of days. There's a big brouhaha about providing transgender care. And I think just about every state legislative Republican with a Twitter account has jumped in on Twitter. So I think you're going to see the supermajority pursuing more of these social issues. I think it's going to be interesting in a sobering way to see what happens with the prosecution of doctors in abortion cases. I think so many people didn't understand that the law is not written so that doctors may perform an abortion to save the woman's life. It's the affirmative defense, which if you are criminally prosecuted for doing so, you have to provide all this. I don't even know how you do that. So I think that's going to be interesting. And what else do I think is coming up? There's also lots of rumors going around about how Nashville will be punished for saying no to the Republican National Convention.
Yeah.
And, there's the current rumor is that the state legislature is going to try to cut the Metro Council to 15 members. Now it's 40 members now. And honest to God, like, I think people are going to be happy about that.
I was going to say, that's always seemed like a very large body to me.
It's like, how many do you guys have there?
Our county commission is 11 and our city council is 9.
Yeah, I mean, Nashville's got like the second or third. I think we're behind Los Angeles and New York. It's insane. We don't need 40 people. So I say this to the supermajority: if you want to cut that Metro Council, go for it. Go for it, guys.
That impulse to punish the cities is interesting, and we saw that a few years ago when Memphis removed the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, and the legislature, I think, pulled, I forget what, some tourism funding or something in retaliation. So of course, having worked at the city of Knoxville, I'm always interested in that relationship between the state legislature and its largest cities.
Well, we could do a whole other podcast on the need to die on the hill of Nathan Bedford Forrest, but we don't have enough time to go into that one today.
Well, thanks very much for your thoughts. Thanks for everything you do. And we will certainly keep reading your work and sending people your way.
Well, same here. Ditto. I appreciate talking to you all. It's nice to see your faces. It's been a while.
Okay, well, thanks again to Holly for talking with us. And again, if you are not a regular reader of the Tennessee Lookout, give them a look. We are now to the Q&A portion of our podcast. Every week we go onto the Compass subscriber Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, we call it. And we invite our readers to suggest any topics they'd like to hear about on the podcast, any questions, things they're wondering about that we might be able to answer. And we had a question this week having to do with the constitutional amendments, the state constitutional amendments that are on the ballot this November, particularly about the process of these, both kind of how does something get onto the ballot and then what does it take for it to actually pass and be approved. And so we're going to have fuller coverage of all 4 of these amendments in the next couple of weeks as part of our election coverage, and we'll talk about them probably a little bit more then. But just to run through them very quickly, the First Amendment has to do with basically taking our existing right-to-work law, which governs, has some restrictions on union activity, essentially in Tennessee, and that's an existing law, and this would make it part of the Constitution, just that much harder to change. The second one has to do with clarifying succession issues for the governor of the state in certain circumstances. The third one would remove any reference to slavery being permitted in Tennessee. Currently in the Constitution, it allows slavery as a punishment for criminal conduct, essentially. And so this would remove any reference to slavery from the Constitution. And the fourth one, remind me what the fourth one is.
The fourth one would allow clergy
That's right.
to serve in the state legislature.
Yes.
Currently, they can't. And
they can because there's an existing Supreme Court precedent that basically overrules this part of the Constitution, but we still have that language in the Constitution. So those are the 4 things. And so how did these get onto the ballot?
Okay, there are 2 ways to change the Constitution of the state. One is if the legislature, by a simple majority, calls a convention, which is usually only done every few decades or centuries to rewrite the Constitution. That's not what this is. To get an amendment on the ballot, it has to go through 2 different general assemblies. And a general assembly is 2 years.
Right.
For listeners who aren't real familiar with the nuts and bolts of state government, it's the General Assembly of the state legislature. They have 2-year terms.
It's basically the term of a member of the House of Representatives.
So it has to go through, be approved in 2 separate general assemblies, 2 consecutive general assemblies. The first one, it has to pass by a simple majority vote. That passes. It goes to the next general assembly, which could be 2 years later, and goes for another vote there. It has to pass by a 2/3 majority in that one, and then it will go on the ballot as at the next gubernatorial election, and then voters have their say, and in order to pass and to actually become part of the state constitution, has to leap 2 hurdles. First of all, it has to have a majority of yes votes, but it's not as simple as that, because then, and this is the weird thing that has a lot of people don't really understand. It also has to have a majority of that number has to be more than the majority of people who voted in the gubernatorial race that year. So what they do is they take the total number of people who vote in the gubernatorial race, divide it by 2, and that's the threshold that the constitutional amendment has to reach. And so then, if 50% plus 1 or more votes are yes votes, then it passes.
Right.
And it's very convoluted way
Well,
to do it.
and one of the ways that particular requirement, taking the percentage of people who vote in the governor's race, that can have an impact. Now this year we have a contested governor's race. Mm-hmm. Probably most of the people who go and vote will vote in the governor's race. Mm-hmm. But imagine you had a year where there wasn't a contested governor's race, mm-hmm. And there just wasn't a lot of interest in it. Mm-hmm. You might have a lot of people come out and vote and not cast a ballot in that governor's race at all. Mm-hmm. It's still the number of people who vote in the governor's race is what sets the threshold for the amendments to pass.
Well, and on the other hand, you could have a contested governor's race, a lot of people vote in the governor's race, and nobody, they skip
right.
the constitutional amendments. Then, as our engineer, Lord Seth, mentioned during a break, one of the constitutional amendment questions fills an entire page of the ballot.
Right.
So people might skip it. Well, if the combination of lots of people voting in the governor's race, raising the threshold, and fewer people actually voting for or against the constitutional or for the constitutional amendment, it's theoretical the number of yes votes wouldn't
right.
reach that threshold.
Right. You could have an amendment where 70% of the votes for the amendment were in favor of it, but if that wasn't half or more of the total number of people who voted in the governor's race, right. it would still not pass.
Right. So,
and that's built in. I mean, it is a weird sounding requirement. It's mm-hmm. sort of complicated to explain, but clearly the goal of it is to make it kind of hard to amend the state constitution. And I think mm-hmm. there's probably good reasons to make it kind of hard to amend the state constitution.
Yeah, they don't. I think the idea is that you don't want to amend the state constitution frivolously.
Right.
It is the foundational document for our state's government, and
also once things get into the Constitution, they can only be taken out by another constitutional amendment. So you got to be thoughtful about what you put in there.
Then you've got a 4 or 5 year process to remove it.
Right.
So it is something that should not be, undertaken lightly.
Right. All right. Well, as I said, we will be talking in more detail about the substance of those proposed ballot measures in just the next couple of weeks. Coming up this next week, we do not have a tremendous amount on the civic calendar. It's the last week of the month, and so most of our local boards and bodies and so forth have met. County Commission is holding its monthly meeting on Monday, where there's not a whole lot really exciting on there. I talked a little bit earlier about the contract with Young Williams Animal Center is on there. There are a few other items. I think some of the more interesting issues will probably come up in the zoning portion of the agenda. One thing they're going to be talking about, which is something you wrote about a month or two ago, Scott, was this proposed martial arts academy on Maryville Pike that the Planning Commission did not grant the rezoning request for. But they are coming and appealing that decision to County Commission, and I'm expecting to see maybe a number of martial arts supporters and practitioners at Monday's commission meeting, so it could get lively.
Well, if it's anything like the Planning Commission meeting was, yes, they will be there, and
breaking boards.
They don't. No, they're a very peaceful, peaceful group. But they are very passionate about what they do. And they are looking for right now. The martial arts school that is involved is they have the building that was the old Pease Furniture building in downtown Vestine, and they want to move further down Maryville Pike. And it's an area where there are a lot of commercial buildings down there, and a lot of them are empty. But their property is zoned for residential use. And the Planning Commission didn't
thought it would be better used for residential
use, so they didn't approve the rezoning request to make it commercial, so they could build a new school building. So they're appealing that to the County Commission.
Well, and we'll see. County Commissioner Carson Daly, who represents South Knox County, so this is in his district, made some brief comments at Commission's work session this past Monday that kind of indicated that he looked at this project favorably, that he thought it could bring things down there. And so we may see a reversal there, or at least some interesting discussion. And certainly we will talk about all of that next week when we come back. Anything else we need to throw in here?
No, well, one thing that listeners need to know is just because we don't have a lot of formal government meetings coming up doesn't mean there's not going to be news and Compass.
Oh yeah, we have lots of things we're working on.
We're working on a lot of stories, what we in the business call enterprise stories, which and on some pretty interesting topics that
taking some deeper looks at some ongoing issues and
So we got that coming up. So we're not on vacation or anything. So.
Not heading back to Gulf Shores?
Not heading back to Gulf Shores. Like I said, I've got to research some other possible locations for new bureaus. It could be in the mountains.
Yeah, we could have a mountain bureau for sure. Maybe some Knoxville news up there.
Yeah.
All right, well, we will be back to talk to you next week. Thanks to our producer, Lord Seth Barber at Barbarian Studios. Our theme music is by Will Wright, and we will talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.